Kyrie Irving has been given permission by the Brooklyn Nets to seek a sign, and hold on a second, friends. Kyrie Irving opts in to the $36 million opt-in last year, and ultimately we think honoring his contract could potentially lead to that long-term extension we all dream on. We'll break it all down here right after the theme music.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, it's the Locked On Nets podcast right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team every single day and sometimes twice, the Brooklyn Nets. I am, of course, Adam Armbrecht. He is Doug Norrie. And the reason why, Doug, we're having a chuckle on the top is because you and I, about 7 seconds ago in this real time of the universe, just finished the podcast about Kyrie Irving being able to seek a sign and trade. Cut to, he'll be opting in.
Oh, it was a great podcast. It's never going to see the light of day.
One of our finest, if I can just be clear.
It was instantly made completely useless within about 16 minutes of doing it. And Adam had a great, we'll get to it in 1 second, but Adam had a great quote. He said, I think 80% of our podcast is useless. I was like, 80%? 100% is useless.
I had some thoughts, I had some loose thoughts that I thought we could pluck out there, chop that up a little bit.
It was all about Kyrie opting out and like nuclear option and the Lakers and this whole thing. Look, it comes out, Shams Charania reported it, and we'll just kind of go with it here that Kyrie is going to opt. Well, excuse me, he's reporting that Kyrie had tweeted it because Kyrie tweeted, "Normal people." I can't even say this without laughing. Normal people keep the world going. Normal people keep the world going, but those who dare to be different lead us in tomorrow. I've made my decision to opt in. See you in the fall. A11 even. Which is Kyrie's Twitter handle. So, I mean, how it's different, I'm not exactly sure, but regardless, he opts into the contract. He's going to be a Brooklyn Net next year. That it instantly increases their title odds. It is exactly what the Nets needed to happen. Who knows what the future holds now, but the fact that, this looks like the scenario that we were kind of waiting for, and we'll get to like what the extension options are here in a second, but this looks like the scenario we were hoping for was that he opts into this piece of the contract. He's going to be a Net, and we see what happens during this 22-23 season if the ship can get fully righted here, and like this looks like a good long-term solution. So all jokes aside, this is kind of what we were hoping to have happen here.
Yeah. You and I talked, you and I talked about every podcast, it feels like over the last several weeks about in this offseason, what was the best option with everything that's gone on over the last couple of seasons, not just the past year, since Kyrie Irving came to Brooklyn, right? And since Kevin Durant got here, everything that's gone on. This felt like the good faith gesture that Kyrie Irving could provide in the short term that allows, by the way, both he, Kevin Durant, and the entire Nets organization to get a little bit of a breath of fresh air from this, get some distance from it, hopefully over this season, and then come back to the table at some point and get an extension hammered out if that's the way that they're going to go. This feels like both sides coming together here. And by the way, it also does feel like the Brooklyn Nets organizationally saying, we are making a firm commitment. We're calling your bluff around opting out and going and signing with LA for $6 million. This is what we'd like to see happen in the short term, and then we can revisit the long term. Kyrie seems to have been willing to go that route.
Yeah, and look, maybe it was like a really quick wake up call around like what the sign and trade options were and what the or weren't. Like that was maybe that's as much as the story as anything else. Is that that. When he looked around the market and, waited to see if the market came to him at all in terms of, facilitating some kind of trade. Trades can be facilitated through agents, by the way. It's often done like that, frankly. Like he has an agent. When you have requests to seek a trade, it can be facilitated through third parties. Like that's not tampering at that point if the team allows it to happen. But if it just came out that none of that materialized, like there was no calls and there was no world where some of these teams wanted to do it, which frankly feels very much probably like what happened, then it maybe became a pretty quick decision to say, hey, the option here, the player option doesn't look too bad. I'll kick the can down the road. I'll have a great season. Maybe I'll ask out at the trade deadline this year. Like, who knows what can happen? Like, it's not like this is still a little fraught with peril, but the part where at least the immediate problem of what you do going into this season, like at least that part is solved. And from that standpoint, that is a really pretty good balancer, because this is kind of exactly what the Nets needed to happen. And maybe like there's a world where this just plays out and everyone feels like really good about the situation and not too far from now. But the fact that this pivoted so hard, I got to tell you, I'm still reeling a little bit. Like we spent so much time talking about the other scenario that I simply am still of the mind that I can't believe this happened so quickly and is exactly opposite of what looked like it was going to happen. I mean, literally 30 minutes ago.
Yeah, pause button pushed, right? This is like the it's the line in Back to the Future. Now, Doc Brown at this point is 30 years different from the time frame that he's referencing, where he goes, things used to look a lot different around here. I remember when old man Peabody wanted to grow pine trees. This was 30 minutes ago, and everything is exactly the same, except for the fact you mentioned it there. First, this does feel like a pause button, right? This is, hey, why don't we push a pause on in the episode you'll never hear, the nuclear option, right? Blowing this whole thing up. Why don't we just push pause for a second? And the second point around what did the landscape look like? You heard, well, the LA Lakers are very interested. And the Brooklyn Nets organizationally made that very clear publicly. We don't want anything to do with what your package is going to look like involving Russell Westbrook, et cetera, right? So once that, I think, kind of irons itself out, and then for Kyrie Irving, he accepts that, well, I do have a finite list of teams that I would go and assign and trade. I'm not going to open it up to any team that might want my services, which would certainly make it more feasible for something to happen. You say, okay, let's take a big, deep breath here and see where we get. And I guess maybe, we've discussed this over the last couple of weeks of, it felt like this was a lot of posturing and a lot of negotiating. And it also did feel like it was getting as acrimonious as it possibly could. And then it's only both went, whoa, guys, let's not get crazy here. And I think that it can be true for both sides. We said this, the Nets know that they're best suited to win a championship in the short term by keeping Kyrie with Kevin Durant. And Kyrie Irving is from here, whatever factor that weighs in on, he probably wants to be here. So it's like neither side wanted to go the extreme, and they managed to avoid it, at least for now.
And look, there's also a world too where, he was able to get some people on the horn and sign and trade, and the Nets were like, no chance, right?
Here's some quiet offers in the background. The Nets were like, yeah, you call those offers?
Right, exactly. Like they were under no, I'm not saying this happened or not, but like there's lots of different ways this could have played out. It could have played out that there was, some loose kind of, loose structure around a deal. The Nets were like, you're not even close, so don't worry about it. And that could happen. Like there's the world where nobody called. There's just so many different things that can happen. And so, but I do think that it's an interesting tell around like what could happen going into this season, because if
it's not done yet,
it's right. And so, but it does a couple things for the Nets here. One, it at least rights the short-term ship that they can go off and look at whatever free agents are available for this season and say, hey, this is our team. Like this is these three guys are going to be here. These are three superstars as a championship equity team. Like we have these guys for this season. Like that in and of itself is a stabilizer in a way that just didn't even exist 24 hours ago. Yeah. And all these free agent talks are happening back channel now. I know they're not supposed to do it till 6 p.m. Thursday. That's a joke. Everyone knows that. It's all happening right now. And that's why all the deals are hammered at 6 p.m.
Just like our last podcast episode. That's a joke. It doesn't even matter. Everyone's having the discussions.
Exactly. So we know. So this just stabilizes the short-term situation to say like, hey, we have a pretty close to complete team here. Anyone that wants to come on for this ride, and even just that alone makes it just such a difference in going into what the free agent market looks like. So I really can't understate, one, again, to reiterate how surprised I am. Two, like what it does for the organization to get this the option, the player option, and then not have committed any long-term dollars yet. Like that, this is the exact thing we kind of hoped would happen, right? Like when we talked about this in the off season, when we said what of all the scenarios that could happen, what's the thing that we would be feel most comfortable with short and long term? It was this exact situation. Now there's a chance to extend, and that might still happen too. And who really knows? But like at least in the short term, it has righted the ship. All right, we're going to talk a little bit more about this Kyrie. I'm going to call it a mini bombshell here in a second. First, got to talk to you about our friends over at Rock Auto. Save time, save money when you use Rock Auto. If you're going to the local chain store to try to get your auto parts these days for a car or truck, I just don't even know what to tell you. You're just doing it wrong. Rock Auto has you covered here. You're going to get prices 30 or even 50% better than those local places. Rock Auto is a family-owned business that's been helping do-it-yourselfers for over 20 years, more than 2 decades. The prices are reliably low for every customer. They have everything you can need: brake parts, tail lamps, motor oil, new carpets. All you have to do right now to make sure you lock in some of these great Rock Auto prices is go to rockauto.com. You'll see all the parts available for your car or truck. You write "Locked On" in the "How did you hear about us" box so they know that we sent you. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car or truck will ever need. rockauto.com.
I'm in a big pointing phase over on YouTube for any of you viewers over there. You mentioned why this is beneficial for a couple of different reasons. I want to get to the extension possibilities here that still can unfold themselves. But remember, also dial it back to last year when they had to trade James Harden, or they chose to trade James Harden to the Philadelphia 76ers. They got back some draft capital as well as Ben Simmons. What they didn't get was a sample size of Ben Simmons on the court with Kyrie Irving and with Kevin Durant. So this opt-in also affords that ability as well. So, it's not a foregone conclusion that, hey, don't worry about it, we'll hash out all the details, this is long-term going forward. But now you can go into the season and from all indications, Ben Simmons should be healthy as well. You'll get the sample size. And that's important, not just for the Nets organization. It's important for Kevin Durant, Kyrie Irving, and Ben Simmons, because once you maybe showcase, hey, this is what we're capable of in this new iteration of our team, that can be as a convincing a factor going forward for all parties involved. Let's stay committed to this. Remember, Ben Simmons on the same timeline as Kevin Durant. Now you can get Kyrie onto that same timeline and play this thing out over the next handful of seasons, which was some version of the intention, we think, at some point along the way.
I'm telling you right now, I bet you Kyrie signs an extension now. Like, I feel like this situation is.
Do you think, did he? I don't want to put this too extremely, but I'm going to reference the Kamenetsky brothers, who were great guys. They cover the Lakers. They had a comment of, so basically Kyrie played a game of 4-dimensional chess against nobody and still lost. I in some ways, like, I think that Kyrie had something that he wanted to accomplish here, which was the immediate max extension right here in this moment, right now, or I'm out of here and I'll do whatever it takes to do that. He's right. He's within his rights to choose that, but that the organization said, we're not blinking. And Kyrie effectively blinked first. It doesn't make it a bad thing, but that he got a little dose of reality. Hey, this team is not at my whim.
All right. Well, so first of all, no one ever loses when they opt in to guaranteed to get paid $36.5 million.
Sure.
So
I've been trying to opt in for that.
I would love to lose like that. I would love just once
I lost.
to be just that kind of loser that is like, oh my God, what a loss. $36.5 million. God. No,
keep it together.
I know what they're saying. Those guys are great. And I know what they're saying. They're saying, like, this was a gambit to see if anything would materialize. It didn't. It's like a little bit of a bet on yourself if you think that the Nets were offering, say, like 2 years for less money or something like that. So, like,
sure,
take the years out a little bit more, reduce the money per year, more overall dollars over the 2 years, but like something like 24 million, right? Over 2 or 3 years. I think like those are the sort of numbers that have been floated around. If you take it like that point of view, it's like hard to say if it's a loss or a win. I get what they're saying, because by comparison, by him looking like he was going to go test the market and the market didn't materialize, it looks like he lost. I actually don't think this is a loss for him. I short of an injury, I think in some ways this begins to reset the Kyrie narrative a little bit. That ridiculous tweet aside about like the, legendary about signing a opt-in, like that's right. I find that to be pretty ridiculous. But otherwise, it's almost like he should have just done this 24 hours ago. And I actually feel like this would have begun resetting some of the narrative around him also, because it's almost like they had to just get like this one little other piece in it. I get it. Like you're trying to get the most out of it, and I totally get it. But like, I do think that this piece maybe begins resetting some of the narrative around like what his motivations are going forward, because I do think there's a world where he could have just done this totally differently, and it wouldn't have seemed totally nuts based on some of the context.
Yeah. And going back to when we said what was the ideal scenario, the opt-in, we mentioned this point about it helps to reset what the perception is of Kyrie Irving. Right, wrong, indifferent. it seems like, and we know the instances from Cleveland to Boston, now to Brooklyn, could have been to the next team, that Kyrie Irving has a difficult time acclimating and maintaining the relationship with the organization that he's a part of by opting into it. To your point, hey, I get it. And he mentioned it publicly. He said, I could have done some things differently. If you just opted into it and said, I'm looking forward to continuing discussions around an extension, I still want to be here long term, and I trust that we're going to work it out behind closed doors. I want to be here with Kevin Durant, right? Like, that would have been more than enough to shift it. This feels like, and to your point, I think by doing this, he avoided the press that line of losing, right? Coming on the bad end of this piece of it. He obviously gets the money. He doesn't have to forego $30 million to go play maybe with LA. And in that sense, too, that was the other part of it that I think, say it was 24 million, right? Per. So you're saying, well, what are you losing? What are you losing on a per year basis? But it was like, right, but you're also going to forego $30 million if you just straight opt out and go to the market and go to LA. As seemed to be the only option. So all those things I think are factors too. Again, I'm not in his pocket. It sounds like a lot of money. It's all a lot of money to me, but I understand why you want to walk through the mechanics. Again, I think you're right. You can now go into this season and just have a great year. Have one great year where you play 65 plus games and this team gets into the playoffs and they win a couple of series. This all falls by the wayside and you can move forward completely differently, whether it's with Brooklyn or not. Because guess what? You can also go to the open market if you don't sign the extension and say, look what I just did this past year. I'm as good as I've ever been. And now I will go to LA or I will go to Team X, right? Like, all the options get better for Kyrie by coming into this one season at least.
It would sure seem like it. It would sure seem like it. You get another year for teams to make plans around free agency. You get another year
open up some money
for teams to, like, open up cap space. No one thought this scenario was going to happen with Kyrie. Like, even if you wanted him, it was going to be really hard to move the deck chairs around to, like, be able to get him, because I don't think anyone foresaw him actually opting out or leaving the Nets just because of, like, how incentivized everyone was going to be around it. So I think that if there were teams that were preparing to maybe make a run at him, you actually almost like need a full season to be able to do it. I do again think that this still opens up for them to sign an extension with him this offseason. He can still opt into the option. He had to do that by June 29th. I can't get the exact date. It does look like he's eligible up to, maybe it might just be on July 1st or something like that. Like, we'll have that full answer next time around, like, what the actual day that he can begin signing another extension after opting into this thing. So but like, again, it was mostly just being able to clear away this first part of it first. I do wonder if there was external pressure from, like, even players union stuff to say, like, hey, you can't sign an MLE. Like, you can't sign $6 million for with the Lakers. It's just like, you're not a $6 million player. Like, it throws the ecosystem of player contracts out of balance and out of whack. If we start doing stuff like this, it does not help anybody. Because when you're a players union, you're incentivized. Every players union and every union is incentivized to get the most money. People that go in and take less money than they are worth actually compromises some union strategies around, because then you just say, hey, Kyrie did it. Why don't you do it? Like, that's a thing that ends up becoming it becomes a part that the other side will use against you later. It's like, hey, Kyrie rehabilitated himself in a situation by just signing for $6 million. You go do that. And, like, that's just not a situation any player, any union and labor organization wants to begin entertaining. So I also wonder if there was, like, a little, like, hey, you are too good to sign $6 million MLE. You have a $36.5 million player option waiting for you. It is not an option for you to take the $6 million and risk it. You're just not at that point of your career. I wonder if there was, like, a little bit of that, like, just because it'd be such a bad precedent for him to have done that.
And to your point, it's not you need to sign an extension. You can't go and opt out of $36 million.
You can't forego $30 million. Like, you cannot forego $30 million in, like, still kind of prime-ish of your career because you're mad at the team. It's going to help nobody. It'll be used against everybody from here on out about, like, situations like that where players are unhappy, they'll just do it. Again, that's that I'm making that part up, but just in terms of labor negotiations, like, that would be if I was running that labor piece, that would be the first thing I talked about, because you just can't, it just compromises the whole, it compromises the collective.
And to I'll make something up too. If you're having these behind the scenes conversations with other teams, these other teams may have said, it would be beneficial if you want to ultimately leave there, it'd be opting in so we can get our ducks in a row. No one can manage this right now. So this is why it's beneficial short or long term. If we want to say, is this all just done and better, done and better and everything's going to be great, we'll come back in and talk about if he ends up signing an extension long term here with the Brooklyn Nets. But all these mechanics, it did seem like things were moving pretty quickly and escalating very fast. It benefited everyone to go, let's just give this a breather here, give it a pause. And again, my only question to you before we get out, Doug, is do you think we'll re-record this episode in 20 minutes or do we get like a whole cycle out of it?
Well, I got a little PTSD here because there's a part of me that's like still going. If I seemed a little distracted for 2 seconds, I'm still going through Twitter right now to make sure we didn't get the, psych.
Just yeah. Oh God. Like that might be an all-time.
You want to know what else is legendary? Saying you're going to do it and then taking it back, or something like that. Because
redefining legendary.
This is the situation that has like bred. This is what the Nets like last couple of seasons have been like. It really has been an absolute. It's been totally unprecedented. One thing that we did mention in the first time we did this that will never see the light of day, but still stands true now, is that this is one of these totally unprecedented situations with players where like randomly two players are tied together. So we talked about this a little bit in the other one, but I'll just try to just quickly go through what we meant. Very rarely when the situation among players is developed like some kind of tension or that seems like sides can't agree, it's almost always that player on an island. It's like, we've seen it already. Ben Simmons, James Harden, Anthony Davis, when he wanted out, like these situations where players want out, it's them against like the team. This is one of those rare situations. And I don't think it's ever really happened where Kyrie and KD just do seem actually connected like at the hip here. And where it does feel like the worry around Kyrie Irving is by extension a worry around Kevin Durant too. And that I cannot think of another example where that has happened. And it's just like so unique. Because usually it's just, hey, that one player A wants out. What do we want to get for player A? It's like, hey, player A wants out and might take player B with him either in the fallout or just because everyone's annoyed. And it becomes like just a crazy situation. I think that's why Nets fans more than anything worried about Kyrie because it could take KD with him. And that's way worse than just losing Kyrie.
Not for nothing. Also, Kyrie Irving opting in does not exclude the idea that there still couldn't be a trade. That actually could still be the part of a mechanics of a trade. Like opting into the money does then commit that.
Well, he basically had to opt in. You're right. Because he basically had to opt in for any trade to happen. So like, I guess we're not out of the could get traded waters here.
Yeah.
I can't even think about that right now, but it just does speak to the highly unusual context that's around this team right now, that we are in uncharted territory here when it comes to like player movement. We've seen the player movement and player empowerment, and it's really kind of reaching new heights. This is a new version of it where it's like player and friend empowerment, and where players are tied together in a way that we really haven't seen before. And it's very difficult to see how to like navigate it.
Let's get out of here. But I think there's a precedent that got set by the organization for the Brooklyn Nets that can be extended league wide. And then also discussing tomorrow, what was Kevin Durant's possible influence on this situation on both sides that maybe got it to a resolution that seems more favorable for everybody.
All right, we are going to get out of here. Like you said, we went lightning round on this bad boy just to make sure we kept it relevant, and appreciate everyone sticking with us. Make sure you subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. Thanks so much for making us your first listen. We're free and available on all podcast platforms. Make sure you subscribe over on YouTube too. I know we're going to get a million comments over on YouTube, so go join the folks over on YouTube that are commenting every day. So much appreciated. Hit like and subscribe on YouTube as well.
Life moves pretty fast. If you don't stop and look around once in a while, you could miss it. Ferris Bueller.
One of the all-time great poets. We will be back again tomorrow talking more Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving led Brooklyn Nets basketball.